Awesome. Thanks for being here, Austin. This is a huge privilege for Sarah and I at Raindrop just to inspire our members, reaching out to full-time artists like yourself. And, I think I first found you when Sarah shared one of your posts of the candle in the hand of a self-portrait.
Oh yeah.
And that moved me so much. This was a figurine she gave me for Christmas as often people refer to me as the keeper of the flame.
Oh,
And
okay.
um, just trying to light the pilot light of those that kind of forget who they are or have lost their way of remembering why they came and what they have to share with the world. And so that really, really spoke to me. And as I dove in, Austin, just your the way you articulate the oneness through your art is emotional for me.
Mm,
As an pretty extreme introvert, I'm challenged with words in that I don't feel I can often articulate in the way that I would like to be expressive. And so most of the time I just stay quiet. And your artwork amplifies some of those feelings inside of me that I can't articulate. So I thank you for that. And what a privilege it is to be able to kind of peek behind kind of your own thoughts and expression through that. So we have a series of questions and we'll stick to some of those. And we did see your post to your community. So we want to hear anything that they want to hear. We want to be sure to hear, get their voices in the room as well. So
awesome. Very good.
yeah. So if before we delve in, do you want to just share where you call home and a little bit about your background, and then Sarah will maybe scroll through some of your Instagram just for the artists that don't know you yet, that
Yeah.
this may be their first introduction. We want to make sure that they kind of see your work before we delve in.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm gonna take out this throat loss. I've been a little sick the last few days. So
Oh, thanks for
um
being here. And I'm
yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
feeling
yeah,
not, under the weather a little bit.
yeah. Okay. So I live in New Mexico, Los Alamos, New Mexico. So my wife works as a scientist at the national lab here. So
Oh,
yeah, we've been here for about 4 years since the pandemic in January. We officially moved here full time. So, but before that, we were in Denver. Yeah, and she has a lot of family in Colorado. So, yeah, and then kind of background, is that what you're looking at?
yeah, just kind of your little bit of background, and then we'll dive into some of those questions I know we shared with you. So, but yeah, just dive in, and then we'll just jump in as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I kind of grew up just doing art since I was a kid, and I was really lucky for that. But I went to a Waldorf school. I don't. Some
Mhm.
people know them. Some
Mhm.
people
Yeah,
don't.
Sarah went to
Montessori.
yeah, Montessori, which I know is different than Waldorf,
Hmm.
but some of that freedom of expression and learning style is.
Yeah, yeah. So I grew up in Maui, Hawaii, and
Oh
so
wow, okay.
I actually did like I think like a year of a Montessori school in kindergarten as well. But
Okay.
yeah, so I ended up at a Waldorf school first through eighth grade essentially, and art was very incorporated throughout kind of everything that you did, and so for me that worked out really nicely because I just love painting and drawing, and I love that form of expression, and so. Um, I think that really kind of jump started me with the passion. I learned very young that this is something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed the skill associated with it and stuff. And so yeah, yeah, from then like I progressed and did art in high school, experimented with a lot of different mediums, and then ended up really enjoying and like honing in on oil painting, even though it was extremely challenging and really hard to work with at first. I loved sort of the history behind it and the masters sort of using it and stuff. And so it felt like it was a worthwhile thing to work through. And so yeah, and then I was an art major in college. So I went to Colorado College in Colorado Springs. And so yeah, I did primarily oil painting along with some digital art there. And so yeah, that's sort of like background of my education. Is that kind of what
Yeah,
you're
no, that's totally
looking
good.
for?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm curious with the oil. So, you say some of the masters were using it, and like, is that like you're like stuck with it because you want it? Like, I'm curious, like, how did you I can't imagine. Sorry, my reference here is that Sarah using art, like she just doesn't have the patience, or using oil.
Right.
She doesn't have the patience
Yeah.
to allow something to dry before she would go in and try to do something more and
Hmm.
smear it like that. She would like, I'm never going to work through that. And
Yeah.
she's
Right.
19, so she, who knows when she's later. But I'm just curious, Austin, does that piqued my curiosity is how did you learn to love oils, or did you like, where was that point where you're like, it no longer, it became part of your medium of choice versus just, like, I'm going to stick with it because this is what you do.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I think very initially, sort of in high school, when we started using it, I think I noticed the gap in skill where, my paintings using oil versus the paintings I would see in art history classes.
Mhm.
And I feel like there was this excitement of wanting to fill that gap and sort of be like, okay, like there's clearly a huge kind of skill range. And so I think that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. I've always been sort of like a very skill-oriented person. And so whenever I love finding things and then developing, skills to sort of improve in them and stuff. And so I think, and then once I got into college, I think I started to learn more techniques. I think in high school, it was sort of a very base level understanding of it. And um, so in college, I started to actually learn techniques and how to thin down the paint and blending and stuff. And I think that's where I really started to kind of take off. And I think what was also important is I was starting to discover what I wanted to paint
Mm.
and render in my work. And I feel like that was really important because sort of growing up, I did very sort of typical, again, I grew up in Hawaii. And so I would do sort of, paint or draw like beach scenes and surfing and sunsets. And while that was kind of fun for me, I don't think it like ignited too much in me. And so when I was in college, I really started to experiment with what I wanted to paint. And so then I think I started to develop, a style with it and um, a lot more excitement towards like abstraction and surrealism and stuff. And so yeah, so I think I was really attracted to sort of like the skill with it and the
Mhm.
level of realism that you could achieve. But then also contrasting that with some more, surrealistic kind of imagery as well.
Yeah, and we'll take a look soon at that. The surrealism and with realism is
Hmm.
really impressive, right? Like you have the realism and the surrealism blended in to where, I don't know, you just have to see your art to really have that
Yeah.
impact of that feeling of like the giant among us and like those pieces that are quite moving, right? But there's the realism in there, and then you're like, okay, there's something that's not quite right, but yet it's really right,
Mhm.
So
Hmm.
at an
Hmm.
emotional level. I'm just going to look at I haven't even looked at my questions here. So we're one of our questions, like, when did you transition from a hobbyist to a full-time artist? But I'm getting the sense that you always knew you were going to be an artist. Is that accurate?
Almost, yeah. Yeah, so I always loved art and I did kind of always see myself doing it in some way, but I'm kind of the type of person that never really thinks too far in the future. And so
Okay.
I decided on an art major in college, not really. I was like, I like doing this, I'm good at it. And didn't really think down the line. And then, it came close to graduation and I was like, what should I do with my art degree?
Right.
So I think I tried to sort of in that like graduation year and then a few years after, I tried to sort of push myself into graphic design a little bit because that felt like a practical use of, my sort of artistic abilities. And, I was really sort of obsessed with the idea of finding like a consistent full-time job, and because I felt like all my friends were doing that, and
Right.
um,
Right. Right.
so there was a little bit of panic there, but Yeah, so I did go into graphic design a little bit for like kind of 1 to 2 years after graduation. And a sort of side benefit of that was I learned and got really good at Photoshop,
Oh,
which really helps me put together my ideas before I even paint them. So
mm,
that was a nice kind of side benefit. But yeah, so I really wanted that. I wanted the stability of like a full-time normal job.
mhm,
And after I finished a sort of graphic design internship, and I didn't really line myself up with any, jobs afterwards. And, my wife, Katie, who's really supportive, her family, and my family were all kind of like, you know, wondering what I was planning on doing next. And Katie was really encouraging. I had done a lot of my fine art alongside my graphic design internship and stuff. And so, Katie was really encouraging me to, try to step into this, as much as I could and see if I could make it work. And so, yes, I think there was a kind of big transition there where I think, kind of growing up, I always loved art. I wanted to push myself into a normal job with, normal people and normal money. And, and then I had to kind of step back from that and really think about what I wanted to do. And, and I think it was a really great choice. And I think it really worked for me. And so I'm really fortunate for that because I feel like, my friends and family sort of believed in me more than I did at that point. And, they were looking at the work that I'd done in college and after college, and they were like,
mm,
you can do this. And I think it was also interesting because I was trying to go to a lot of kind of art shows in Denver,
mhm,
and I was starting to meet actual full-time artists, and I didn't really, I think, realize up until that point that it was very plausible and
mhm.
doable. And so so I think that really helped. I would annoyingly go up to any artist and ask them, if you could give me one piece of advice and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah, yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what
just
we're doing to you now, right? We're
yeah,
Mhm.
asking
yeah. I
you the
just
same
tried
thing.
to,
It comes circles back around.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I was really just trying to fill my head with tips and any kind of thing and
Mhm.
stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love in your artist statement, I think it was how you talked about combining the humanity with the nature and having that kind of vulnerable emotional effect with your art.
Mm.
And so, how I know that nature and the human combination inspires your artistry, but did that come kind of through you as you were creating your style and your visions, or how did that inspire your art in your full-time journey?
Yeah, so I think I've always had such a strong connection with nature. I grew up in Maui and then went to Colorado. And so I feel like I've always had such a strong connection with it. And I think that developed into this theme where I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I could be myself and be vulnerable when I'm in like natural environments and when I feel much more connected to my surroundings. And so I think that sort of like built on itself in my work. And I knew that I loved painting and illustrating natural settings and landscapes. And but I think I always wanted a little bit more than that. And so I think that's when I pushed myself a little bit more into abstraction. And so then I kind of found my way back with this sort of combination of humans and nature that really just felt right for me. I think
Mm-hmm.
I've been able to like delve into really important themes for myself and for other people and stuff. And so I think once I kind of got onto this theme and got rolling with it, it felt really true to myself. And I think that's what was super important. And I think that's what other people started to understand too.
Mm-hmm.
When you're kind of in line with yourself and your beliefs and where you stand on things, I think people start to see that and understand it. And you know they see it through your work, essentially, which
Right.
I feel very fortunate for.
That
Yeah.
reminds
Yeah.
me just real quick of things our last artist sent us that um it was a quote from I think Carl Rogers, anyway, I don't, I'll have to find that. But anyway, this is what Carl Rogers pointed out when he wrote, I have found that the very feeling which has seemed to be most private, most personal, and hence most incomprehensible by others has turned out to be an expression for which there is a resonance in many other people. It has led me to believe that what is most personal and unique to each of us is probably the very element which would, if it were shared or expressed, speaks most deeply to others. That has helped me understand artists and poets who have dared to express their unique selves. And that's on Becoming a Person in London in 1961, page 26. So that's what I want to acknowledge, what you just said, Austin, which is most, it's almost like a coming out of artists, right? You're at the beginning, you just want to blend in. And then there's, if you allow it, right, there's this expression that is most private, and you have to be incredibly vulnerable to share that. And even if it's just with your wife, Katie, or with those, there's still a point where you're willing to share that and expose yourself. And I feel like the visual I get is just an opening of the heart, and you're like, kind of like one eye closed, like, okay, here I am. And I'm out on the canvas, and yet that is what brings others to tears, and to bring others to like, wow, you saw my heart. And so there's this deeper knowing for those that are brave enough and willing enough to share that and expose that, is the flow that you crave. Yeah. So thank you for being willing
Yeah, it's beautiful.
to go there for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. And I think especially with the kind of piece you mentioned earlier with the hands in the candle, choosing light, that was really, straight from my heart. And I do think it was one of those paintings and one of those descriptions that really, I just really felt like I was opening myself up and really wasn't sure if people were going to feel what I was saying or what I was feeling. And, it was about my personal sensitivity, and how I go about the world. And so it was, really raw. And I really do try to take a lot of time with my painting descriptions. And I will, take photos of my piece, and I'll sit down and have the photos open with a document and just like really, take sometimes hours, really trying to think about what I want to say through this piece. And yeah, and so I think that piece, at least at the moment, was just almost my truest expression of that. And and I think that's why I kind of titled the video, my version of a self-portrait, even though I hadn't really even thought about it in that way up until I posted that video. I just sort of wanted an interesting title, and that kind of came to me. But the more I thought about it and the more people responded to it, it really made sense. And, and so people were seeing that as a sort of self-portrait, which, just I felt so heard through that painting.
I felt seen through that piece. So Sarah, do you, by chance, can you get that? You're much quicker than I am to show that right now, because it truly was moving for me. Share it.
There we go. Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
so deep and beautiful.
Yeah, and then when you wrote about like I feel the emotion like all right there right now. So yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, and I also, I've done other paintings of other people's hands as well. And so I think what sort of triggered that initially was that this was a photograph that I took of my own hands. And
Wow.
Wow.
you know, yeah, and so I think it couldn't help but spark some really, introspective kind of thinking. And and so yeah, but I set up my camera on a tripod and kind of locked myself in our closet to take photo references for this. And so a lot of people kind of ask about like the light source for these kind of pieces. And so what I had done is I have a string of Christmas lights, and I kind of try to cover up all but one, and then I'll kind of hang it off something, and then I'll take just like hundreds of photos, with different poses. And, you know, kind of longer exposure on my camera and stuff. And it's a little tricky, but
It's phenomenal.
That's, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, like even the light, like your lighting on all your pieces
Mm-hmm.
is phenomenal. But like even the like the little hint of light up on the top of the thumb, like it's just it's really impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that piece is how I found you, and it really
Yeah.
they spoke to me, and just the element of the flame, like it, all your meaning around this, the hot wax on your hand, like it is how we feel each other and humanity, and feeling connecting not only with the light, but also the pain that it can bring at times, and the beauty of it. So yeah, thank you for capturing that. Thank you for bringing that up, Sarah.
yeah.
So Austin, could you take us through a typical day? Like a typical, when there's no pandemics or when the world is like nature cycling, the sun comes up and the moon rises and all of that kind of sort of normal activity. Just a typical day or week that would be like, take us, into your life, a typical day with Austin, as a full-time artist.
Yeah, yeah. So I will kind of say right off the bat, I always do try to gravitate towards painting. Um, you know, I was talking to my wife about this beforehand and kind of running through the questions, and you know, there is a variety of stuff that I do, you know, day to day, but I think what's always really important to me is sort of grounding myself in the work. And so if I am doing other things, I will always try to get in, you know, even if it's just an hour or two of painting, um, that really kind of grounds me and just brings me back to the work of it and that kind of creativity and that excitement. And so, yeah, you know, I mean, typical day, I'll, you know, wake up, I'll, you know, eat breakfast, like that kind of stuff. And I'll usually try to get into here, you know, at 9 a.m. or beforehand. And you know, just try to like kind of get myself set up and get to working. And you know, I'll listen to music, podcasts, audiobooks. Like, you know, I paint for so many hours that I need kind of different
Yeah.
stuff going on. And so but yeah, I'll always try to kind of set up my rhythm. And you know, but yeah, and so you know, sometimes, you know, some days I'll kind of go to the gym in the early afternoon, come back, kind of continue painting. And so that variety kind of helps me. And so it is funny because I do put, you know, so many hours into my work, but I feel like the variety, you know, is helpful. And so I've always been a very physical person. And so I've loved sports and, you know, exercise and stuff. And so having that as like a component throughout the week, you know, it really helps me out and, you know, makes me feel a little less confined and stuff. But yeah, you know, often I'll just kind of, you know, I'll be in here working and, you know, working on different sections of a painting and stuff. And I work on one piece at a time. And so I just kind of hyper focus onto one until I feel like it's done. And so, yeah, but yeah, so I try to, you know, timing wise, I try to treat it like, you know, close to like a 9 to 5, you know, and so if I am just working on a piece, you know, I'll try to be in here, you know, approximately 9 to 5. And I something that's also helped me is kind of having like deliberate, just small breaks kind of throughout the day, because I can kind of get sucked in and I can feel myself kind of getting antsy. And so, you know, I kind of have just little like time points kind of throughout the day where I'll just like kind of take a break, sit back, have a snack or something, and you know, it just reset mentally a little bit. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I was curious if you worked on multiple pieces or if you had multiple easels
Mm-hmm.
going on or just one piece, and yeah, for doing that. And so how do you manage the like the business side? Do you break that up into like, you wear in different hats, or do you break that up in a day? Like, the business side of being an artist and being posting. And I don't want to underestimate, and it really resonated that I think it was the story that you added today around all the work that that you do. Okay, this might be another question. I'll try to finish the sentence. But the work that you do to as the inspiration's coming, right? It sounded like you do some Photoshop, you do some research, you're doing that creative process, which churns, I think it is like, you feel it kind of manifesting, it's coming into something, you're getting ideas, you're following each kind of a rabbit trail. And that might not be your style of doing it. Sometimes for me, it's like, I don't know where it's like, everything is a yes until it like, because I don't know where it's going. Right. So I'm like following it, and then it starts coming together and you feel that thing, but all that's behind the scenes, right? I mean, that could take anywhere from, the fire starts, or it could be a birthing process, whatever that is, until you're actually at the canvas, doing your grid and doing your work. A lot has gone into that. And at the same time, I believe, and correct me if this isn't for you, is that's undetermined amount of time, that process, right? It
Mhm.
might come in spurts, it might come in whatever it comes in, and you create time for that, right? As a professional artist, that's part of the process. And at the same time, there's marketing, there's, the piece that you just finished, was it commissioned? If it wasn't commissioned, like, is it, you got to churn that as well, which is not part of, most artists don't find that as part of the creative process. So how do you manage that? And sometimes I see it as masculine, feminine, right? It's this like the creative piece of energy. And then there's this like, all that. I think hopefully you feel my question more than I can actually articulate it. But if you could like, is that a graceful process for you, or is it, hard stop and you're just like, okay, I'm going to discipline myself? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to think it's graceful, but it's a little hard to say. But yeah, essentially I do. I will typically try to block out some time, whether it's throughout the week or sometimes it gets pushed to the weekends. But where I have those business aspects and in kind of thinking in that different headspace, and sometimes honestly it can be a bit of a relief for me because sometimes I get in such a like stressful creative mode, and I'm very analytical about my pieces, and so sometimes it's good to take a step back from that and you know um you know even if it's small, like something like updating my website, adding a blog post, working on print orders or things like that. um that can be a nice break from being in the studio and kind of being up in my head a lot. And so, yeah, so I'll try to block off kind of time throughout the week to do that. And sort of a good habitual thing for me is, posting on social media, and like, I'll, do that kind of every morning before anything else happens. And so that can kind of help get me in that headspace and stuff. But yeah, so I'll definitely have phases where there've been times where I am anticipating a show, in like a few months or 6 months or something, and so I'll sit down and take like half my day or something and work on ideas and just throwing around kind of like ideas, and I kind of do that all in Photoshop, and that's kind of my way of sketching essentially. And so yeah, so I'll deliberately kind of have that time. And I think it is really helpful. It can be a relief from the work. It can be something different to change it up a little bit. And and it does benefit you. I feel like most of my kind of recent commissions I've gotten is because people have found me through my website, because of the search engine optimization, and kind of where my website kind of falls on searches and stuff. And so I'm really fortunate for that. But yeah, and sometimes it really does take like a deliberate mindset change where I need to really pull myself out of the work, and I'm like, I need to do something different. Like, I've been working on this all day, every day, like, do something different, and kind of knowing that those other business aspects do have a lot of value, and stuff. And I'm such a literal person. And so I'm always like in the headspace of, if I'm not directly putting paint to canvas, it's not work. But that's not true. Like,
Right.
you see the other aspects as work, even if it like, I've been trying to be able to take work time as creating Instagram reels and stuff, even though that feels a little silly, and you know, some people kind of knock off social media, but it's a big way for me to reach people and to get
Yep.
sales and stuff. And so you know, looking at that as, you know, work, you know, and even if it's like jumping on little trends and stuff, it's all work. So
Yeah. Right. And I always, it came to me years ago that self-care is your work. You know, so it's all work. If you're in your intuitive, you know, authentic self, right? It's just, you know, finding that rhythm, right? Even going to the gym, right? Is feeding your creativity, right? Of eating, you know, all of that is so it's the holistic approach to artistry. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And you kind of touched on this a little bit throughout our conversation, but what does your creative process look like? I mean, you mentioned that you listen to some music, you listen to podcasts, you work out, you take some breaks, but do you sit down and have like just go into it, or do you have a process of what that kind of looks like for you?
yeah, that's a good question. Um, yeah, I mean, I I think I look at it as kind of sitting down and getting into it, but I think there's a lot kind of going on that I don't really acknowledge usually. But you know, so I usually will sit down and like if I kind of pre-mix all my colors and stuff, and so
Mm-hmm.
you know, usually I'll be like color mixing, and so I'll be in this mindset of really looking at my colors and values and stuff, and you know, then I'll usually kind of think about, okay, like what section of the painting was I working on? And, you know, am I going to go back into that, or should I start something else? And I also feel like what helps is at the end of the day, I will also kind of sit back for my piece and think about, okay, what do I want to do tomorrow? You know, like where do I see this going in the
Mm-hmm.
next few days? And I think that just kind of mentally gets me started and like kind of anticipating things and stuff. And but yeah, so and it's interesting because sometimes I feel like with my recent pieces, I've been in such an analytical mode with them that if I put on any sort of like podcast that's a little too like involved, I feel like it distracts me. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I need something a little more neutral, like just some sort of background music or something. Um, but yeah, you know, what is comforting is like again kind of the rhythm that I get throughout the day and throughout the week. I do have like specific kind of podcasts that I like to go back to, you know, like kind of genres and stuff. And so you know, I'll kind of have a rhythm of listening to those kind of in the morning and getting to other ones in the afternoon and stuff. And so that kind of rhythm is just very comforting for me. And so I feel like it allows me to kind of put my whole self into the work, you know, and so nothing else is kind
Yeah.
of distracting. But yeah, so I hope that kind of helps. Like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very kind of like analytical, and you know, I feel like there's a lot of kind of going on background where
Mm-hmm.
I'm not conscious of it, but I'm making all these micro
For sure.
decisions, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you're faced with like a challenge, like if you're working on a piece, and especially as you kind of finish one piece, but you run into something that's just not like it's either the tone's not quite right, the color palette's not quite right, like it's something unexpected, like it's all of a sudden you're challenged with an area. What do you how do you overcome that that creative block or that challenge with that piece or that you know in that moment, like what's your go-to?
Yeah. So I feel like if it's, you know, sort of a broad spectrum versus a small situation. So actually I have that situation with a painting that you can't see because I'm kind of hiding. But yeah, and so I have a piece where, you know, kind of similar to what you're saying, like I have a section where I'm not quite getting the color and the value right in like otherwise, which is like a very smooth gradient and stuff. And so I do have kind of a little bit of OCD to the way that I work. And so I, you know, can sometimes obsess over things like that a lot. And I'm working on kind of like dealing with that kind of feeling and trying to, you know, take a step back from that and stuff. And so so with this kind of painting issue, I'm trying to, you know, I'll put some paint down and kind of take a break from it and let it dry and then kind of see how it looks a little bit later on. But yeah, I think those things can be tricky, and like kind of broad spectrum, like sort of creative blocks, you know, I've definitely kind of been in that situation. I think around kind of 2022, I had done just a slew of shows, and I had felt very like creatively kind of burnout. I was kind of like, that's all my ideas. I have no more. Like I will never be able to make anything new again. And you know, that can be a little tricky, but I think having kind of other outside life experiences will kind of fill you up again, that then allows you to, you know, like you're gonna come up with ideas. You just have to like let yourself be and not force it and stuff. And so yeah, so I think kind of like having other things outside of it, you know, kind of like we were saying, like if you have some sort of like monotonous business thing that you can do, you know, like honestly, like while you're doing that thing that's like feels so boring and like, you know, repetitive, you're gonna start having background thoughts and ideas that are gonna, you know, form into something later. And so, yeah, so I think that's kind of how I deal with it. And luckily, I have a lot of ideas that I've kind of saved up in my computer and just like
Mhm.
have
So the
kind of ready.
backlog of,
Yeah. And I feel like that's really important. And
yeah, that's a good point.
yeah, if at all possible, I feel like that's important for artists. And because I think helps me have something to kind of go back to, and you know, find some excitement about these kind of new ideas that are going to come later and stuff.
Yeah,
So
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so what are some key milestones or like achievements that really stand out to you in your artistic career that you're proud of that really stand out to you?
yeah. Yeah, I was trying to think about that one. You know, I think what's tough is some of these achievements can be so intangible and stuff, but you know, like something that I had thought about kind of immediately is just I've had a really nice run of kind of commission paintings lately, you know, custom work for people, and I've been feeling really lucky with them because they've been spaced out so nicely and appropriately, and they've been kind of like usually like the last few have been kind of bigger projects that I've been able to like, you know, sink like a few months into. And um what's been really awesome is the clients, they're looking for something really meaningful, and like that's sort of why they found me. And I think that was something new for me, is, you know, people specifically sort of researching me and, you know, researching other artists and then kind of coming to me and being like, this is the person I want to render this image
Mm-hmm.
for me. And I feel like people are the sort of selection process has been really nice because you know, people are not only looking at my work and seeing kind of what I can do, but they're also reading like my painting descriptions, and they're seeing sort of the emotion that I put into the work, and that makes them, you know, be like, yeah, that's why I want this person. And so yeah, so I've had some really great commissions that have been very like really just meaningful lately, and you know, I've been able to sort of plan them out and stuff, and it's been really nice. I'm gonna really briefly look at my notes because I think there was maybe one more thing that I had said. Oh yeah, so the sort of other one was sort of getting with my first gallery, which is a Ben gallery in Denver. I sort of early on when I was doing this full time, I sort of saw working with a gallery as just the sort of the peak, the, you know, of what I could achieve. And so I had sort of honed in on this gallery, and um, I thought I had sort of a good portfolio of work to show them. And so I went in person to their shows a lot, and then I finally kind of got up the courage to go up to the curator very nervously and say, I want to submit my work to your gallery, and you know, I would love to work with you, and I'm an artist, and you know, all this stuff very nervously. And so I like submitted, and they were like, we got it, thank you, and just kind of never heard back from them essentially. And never heard back from them until 2 years later in the pandemic in 2020, when it was really funny because they reached out in that same email thread of my application, and you know,
Years
they said,
earlier.
Yeah, genuinely 2 years later,
Wow.
they
Wow.
they were like,
Wow.
we've been seeing your work on Instagram, like we've been seeing, the progress you made. We would love to have you in a few shows and stuff. And
Oh, wow.
um, I think that was really amazing for me because by that point I had almost forgot about them because I was so invested in my own work.
Right.
Um, and so I think it's like, yeah, it's one of those things where those things can come to you when you don't really expect it. But
Mhm.
I don't think anything will beat that kind of feeling that I had when they emailed me and I was like, oh my gosh, like they're replying to this email application from several years ago. But yeah.
That's awesome. I just love that whole story, right? Thanks for noticing to bring that up, right? That it's the waiting, but all of that you got yourself out there and did all that, and then how you felt as the gap grew and grew and
Mhm.
grew in silence. And then, we tell ourselves all these maybe stories that aren't true, but then you finally release it and then it comes back to you, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You're like, whoa. Yeah. Yeah. It's just those seeds that you never know that were planted, that you don't know what they're going to, when they're going to come to fruition, or how that manifests. So that's super cool. That is super cool. Let's see. Sarah, do you have another one on that one, or?
I guess, how do you measure your success within your paintings? Like, is there any degree that you wait until it's like exactly how you want it, or I'm like, how do you measure your success in your painting?
And your completion with a painting
And
too.
your completion. That's the word.
That's interesting. Okay, okay. Yeah, I think I think there's sort of two steps for me in a weird way because I think once I've rendered something in Photoshop, I think there's a refining process there where I
Mhm,
want it to
mhm,
look exactly a specific way. And so I think there's like a sort of mini completion process at that point. Um, but then with the actual painting, I think in the background, I always want it to look better than the reference I created. Um, and I want it to, I want it to look cohesive. I don't want it to look like a photoshopped image. I want it to look like a painting and have that emotion with it. And so I think that's like a little intangible. I think I've actually sometimes created like a little bit of a checklist. And so I will sort of I will essentially fill out the canvas, color wise and stuff. And
mhm.
then um, I'll kind of take a step back and make these mental notes and like write them down and then kind of go through that checklist of just like little things to change, like little like inconsistencies I see. And you kind of again going back to like I want the pieces to look as realistic as possible within the context of being something that's surreal and kind of dreamlike and emotive. And I feel like that realism sort of helps with that because you get drawn in by the realism and
Mhm.
it's
Right.
it's an interesting balance. And so I think I wanted to have those kind of components. But yeah, so I have done sort of like a checklist of things. And but sometimes I need to like take a step back from it. Like I literally need to put the painting in the corner, turn it around and not look at it for like a week or so. Because sometimes I've just been seeing it way too much. And so
Right.
um, then getting that visual break can be good. And then you look back at it. Um, but yeah, sometimes I've actually had trouble finishing paintings. The piece isn't here, but it was a double exposure portrait that I had done of my older sister, and I had so much trouble actually being done with it. And my wife Katie would, come into the studio and she'd be like, "You're working on it again," like, and I had trouble kind of stopping and just adjusting little things and stuff. And so that's a little bit of the sort of OCD in me, yeah, so yeah, finishing a piece can be a very kind of odd thing, but yeah, sometimes you just have to be done. And sometimes you have to be done and look at it as a step, and be like, this doesn't need to be the greatest painting I've ever made. This is a part of my larger collection of work that I've made throughout my life. And so that kind of context I think can help.
Austin, I just have to say how refreshing it is to hear your analytical brain come through as an artist. I often say the
Mhm.
highest mountain I ever climbed was that of the bell curve because I'm 3 standard deviations off on analytical and 3 standard deviations off on intuitive. And sometimes that's really takes a reckoning in your body, right? Because you have both of these things that want to be honored, and I do very much do that. So I just have to say how refreshing it is to hear you as an incredible artist, and yet you're so damn analytical. So that I find that really refreshing. Anyway, that's just
I
a
appreciate
side
that.
note.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like a lot, the more artists I meet, they do really have that kind of side to them. They can have the most, expressive looking and, spontaneous looking work, but
Yeah.
there can be so much behind it, that you
Yeah,
don't.
it's just so refreshing to me because how I manage it really is that I just like get a download or whatever that creative expression is, and then execution is very analytical. And so it's really like the ebb and flow that sometimes graceful, sometimes not. But anyway, I just had to say that how that feels good in my body. How
That's
analytical you are. So I appreciate that. Um, let's see. Let me look at my questions right here. So, what advice would you give an aspiring artist who dreams of turning their passion into a full-time career? And I know you've taken more of a direct path, right? Um, but so maybe it's paired with this other lessons you've learned along the way that you wish you knew when you were starting, or um that you don't have to listen to the social norms of having to get a job, or like what would you even somewhere in that a question to an aspiring artist, what would you
okay.
give, you could give them permission, maybe that is it, if you would give them permission and they just need to hear a permission, what would that be?
Oh yeah, okay. I think that works nicely to what I thought about before. I would say permission. I would give them permission to receive help. I think that's a really big thing, and something that I was a little resistant to because I think there's a sort of flawed, visualization of artists of being sort of a lone wolf, and
Mhm.
uh, it's their legacy, and they make all the decisions on their own, and they decide what to create and when and why. And I think especially early on, if you're in the mindset of being open to accepting help, that can really expedite a lot of things and really help you along the way. And I think luckily my wife is, back when she was my girlfriend and stuff, she has always been so involved. So it almost wasn't a question of the help that she would give me and the help that like her family had, given me and my family and, friends and stuff. And, just like kind of little things of like, friends and family coming to shows, sharing your social media posts, um, you know, hearing you out when you're trying to, think through an idea or something or a frustration. Um, you know, if you have, people in your life that you're willing to like share that with, I think that's really huge. Like my wife's family helped me set up my first studio in Denver, and it's something that I like didn't even think of it in my brain, but all of a sudden they were there and they were helping move stuff.
Oh,
And yeah, so I think accepting that help and seeking out that kind of help can be really huge because you don't need to do it alone. No one expects you to. And that's how you can start to build, community, whether it's in person or on social media and stuff. And so,
mhm,
yeah, I honestly, I think that's a big one because I think that helped me a lot once I start to embrace it, you know.
mhm. Thank you for speaking into that. And that's really the basis of Raindrop, right? We to create this membership where people that may not have that support when they're in self-doubt and they're not quite ready to expose their heart to social media, so they can do that in a safe place in a membership where we meet live, and to be that emotional and mental, and we're not therapists or anything like that, but just to like, hey, we got you, we want to see your, we have everything but the best in mind for them, and to believe in them more than they believe in themselves, until some of that can come to fruition. But it is a constant theme where we've been interviewing with artists and hearing artists, is if you is don't do it alone, right?
Yeah.
So thank
Mhm.
you for speaking into that it's typically either with a partner, supportive family member, whatever it is. So far that we have not yet met one who's been the lone wolf.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's something that's not quite expressed enough, I feel like.
Mhm. So thank you for speaking into that voice. Yeah.
And how do you aim to connect with your audience on social media and through your posts? And is there any memorable experience that you've had with someone that have had impact viewing your art?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the kind of connecting with people, I I feel like I try to do that so much through my work. You know, I try to be in a very like vulnerable and real state while I'm creating
Mhm.
it, as well as while I'm writing descriptions for the work and stuff. And I feel like more and more people are sort of reading what I have to say that's behind the painting, you know, and so I think that that can really help. But you know, I do my best to show up, you know, in a very authentic way on social media. Um, and I know it's hard because there's such a trend in social media to sort of be, you know, filtered, and it's a very almost different version of you. And so I do my best to, you know, like show up authentically, especially through like, you know, what the caption that I have along with my posts and stuff. And but you know, it's also a similar thing, you know, actually at in-person shows as well. I think when I'm talking to people about my work, I also try to listen to what they're saying about my work, because I do enjoy hearing what other, you know, because I've heard takes from people that I had never even thought of, and interpretations of my work that I, you know, didn't really intend, but I love that that's what people find. And you know, so I've loved being at in-person shows and being able to talk to people and listen to, you know, how they experience my work. And you know, and that actually does kind of lead into a really nice kind of specific example where I had done, I think it was my kind of like very first show in Santa Fe, that's, you know, like 45 minutes south of us. And um, it was such a great reception. I was meeting so many really kind people. And this kind of one lady kind of kept coming back to me. And I always, in the corner of my eye, I would see her looking at the painting that I was exhibiting. And she had such a emotional and raw kind of reaction to it. And she ended up buying the piece, and it was such a great night. And like I feel like she, you know, she really understood the kind of meaning of the painting, and she really resonated with me and as an artist. And um so she bought the piece, and then I ended up kind of following up with her via email and just saying, I hope you're enjoying your painting. It was so great to meet with you. And she sent this very long, really you know, intense emotionally email that brought me to tears because she had lost someone really important in her life, and the title of the painting was Missing Pieces. And so
Mhm.
she was talking about how, you know, this person that she lost was her missing piece. And you know, she had lost that person, and then the pandemic happened, and life was crazy, and she had felt like she didn't ever have a chance to breathe kind of until she saw this painting. And
Oh,
and
wow.
I, and what she was saying is like she felt like the painting was allowing her to kind of like move forward with her life and giving her a sort of new breath. And it was so intense, and I was just crying reading it. And you know, and so, you know, sometimes you just don't realize how your work is going to affect people. And you
Mhm.
know, so that was just so like real for me. And just like a really big kind of personal highlight that I want to like kind of keep in my memories. And you know, it's a reminder of kind of like why you're doing what you're doing. Like I'm wanting to, you know, connect with people and allow other people to connect with themselves. And so it was such a concrete, you know,
Yeah.
sort of example of that.
Yeah, that's
Thank you for
incredible.
that story. Yeah,
Hmm.
that speaks volumes. And also it's been through the conversations that I reach out to people, and it just is a reflection of who we're, I guess, seeking, and those that are seeking us, in that initially we're just looking for artists, right? Because I really believe, you know, that just the art expression can change the world, right? It's just having that fresh expression, what you just explained in that scenario, in that story, that's what elevates us, right? That's what changes humanity. And so, but into my surprise, I don't know why, sometimes I'm just naive in that, I don't know, say not all artists are artists. We believe everyone's an artist. Let me see how I can articulate this well without sounding like an asshole. Just that it's that willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to be seen messy, to be seen whatever that is without a mask on, and that we've shifted a way of looking for artists to looking for thought leaders who express themselves through art.
I see.
And I thought they were one in my naive space. I just assumed that was one and the same. But it's the artists who are just trying to mimic, be the echo of what's out there, versus those that, like yourself, Austin, which is just a huge honor to have you to be able to be, in our presence and being, and in that expression from your presence and being, it's that. And I don't know necessarily how to articulate that, but that's who we're seeking, right? And to have your voice be heard as much as we can amplify that, because it's not creating an echo in the way that it's going to have more artists like you. It's that you're giving them permission to be their art and their full expression, and whatever that looks like. And it's a different tone, right? It's a different sound to that versus a repeat, that's out there. And so I'm just discovering, Sarah and I together are discovering, and we're being kind of agile in our way of like, okay, tweaking and honing into that, I guess, narrowing down to amplify those voices to actually really impact humanity. So that story really, it was impactful, that is the work, right? That's who we appreciate to partner with. So I think you mentioned about how you like really incorporate your balancing with your well-being and your holistic approach to like working out and eating and stacking and staying hydrated and all of those things. Are there any other pieces of your self-care or your well-being, or how to be in that place of authenticity without all the, comparisons, and, how do you navigate being in balance and holistic well-being while there's a part of you that still compares, like, and judges, right? How do you, I guess, balance that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's something that has always been an interesting dynamic with me, because I've also always been an athletic person and in, competition with people in a way, and so I think kind of early on, I loved to do that, just kind of mentally and compare myself to others. And then I think I started to realize that it was just not really healthy for me, and kind of just unnecessary. It doesn't really affect anything, and it can only kind of harm you. And so I think I do still have those impulses sometimes, where it's not necessarily like a reaction to a work that I've seen someone create. It's usually sort of like an accomplishment, like they've received some sort of award or started working with a gallery that I want to work with, and stuff. And I think what I try to remind myself is like, like any artist's accomplishment it's an accomplishment for the whole community. And it really is, because that recognition leads to more recognition. And I try to be in this mindset of there's room for all of us, like there's room for all creatives. And because I feel like early on there was just so many people that were saying, oh, you're going into a really competitive industry. And that always felt weird to me, because I was like no one's competing with each other. Like,
Right, right.
we're all individuals just, screaming into a void and trying to express ourselves. And so there is absolutely room for everyone and everything that they want to express. And so, yeah, so when I get those kind of like those little tinges of emotions where I'm like, oh, like I want what that person just, what they have or what they accomplished. I just try to take a step back and realize like, and it's also like just like a time thing. You have to let life unfold, and so it's you don't need to force anything like that. And by constantly comparing yourself to others, it's not going to do anything for you. And so yeah, so I really try to like take that step back and just realize like it's good for all of us. There's room for everyone. Like no need to compare really. Everyone has their own voice, and that's why it's an amazing community.
Right. Do you find yourself competing with yourself, or do you give yourself the same grace?
um, I think um, I think I've reached hopefully a more healthy way of competing with myself. Because I think I used to not only want every painting to be in my eyes better than the last, but I wanted to be drastically better. And there was a time where that was a thing. I think when I kind of fully went full time and was putting in, like 7 to 8 hours a day of painting. And, I think my work was really hitting these sort of leaps and bounds in terms of, technique, composition, concepts and stuff. But I think now like you can't always ask for exponential growth like that. And so I think I've sort of realized that. And so I think I always look for an aspect of my piece to be better than the last. And so whether that's sort of like, execution of, a sort of realistic technique, or if it's something that I realize I've never painted before. I had never painted a candle in a flame before that piece.
Wow.
And okay, that's a nice little like, box check. Like, this is something new and I really enjoyed it. Or if it's, compositionally, I feel like one piece is stronger than the last, or with like the painting description, if I feel like I really, honed in on something that, felt really good to me and connected with people and stuff. And so I think I'm a little bit in that mindset now, not just always thinking every painting has to be leaps and bounds better than the last. And yeah, so I think a sort of healthy amount of competition and wanting to be a little bit better each time.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I do want you to, be kind and loving to yourself is your expression out there. So I appreciate that. Sarah, do you
What do you have any future goals with your art and your journey with that?
Yeah, I'm gonna really quickly just make
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
Um,
And I know you had mentioned that you don't think super far out there,
Right,
right? That you
right.
just allow
Hmm.
allow that to unfold. And so you don't, whatever you see is where we'll end on that note.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think one big thing, sort of, if I'm in the headspace in the studio and the work I'm creating, is I've been wanting to create bigger paintings for, I feel like, almost like a year or two now, and it always kind of gets pushed back by gallery shows and commissions and stuff. And but I had specifically bought these pretty big canvases, and they're just kind of sitting ready for me at some point. And
So would you describe big, like, so we
uh,
have a perspective?
they're like, I mean, it's kind of big for me. Like one's like a 2 by 4 foot, and then the other's like a 3 by 4 foot.
Yeah,
So,
it's pretty big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
I feel like I've always had a different scale at this point, because I've done several gallery shows where we've done 5 by 5 inches, and so
Oh, wow.
that's kind of like my new measure of like the smallest that I've done. But
Yeah, I saw that one on your or on your easel, right? And I'm like, I
Mhm.
can't believe it's that little because it looks big, like it feels
Right.
big,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then
Hmm.
we see it on your
Hmm.
easel, and it's like, how can that be so little? Yeah.
Yeah. I've tortured myself over those 5 by 5s, but yeah. So I just like I have these sort of ideas saved up that I have almost exclusively reserved for like a bigger canvas, um and so but those are a kind of a big like several month commitment, and so but yeah, so that's sort of internally that's something that I really want to do.
Hmm.
you know, other kind of like more, you know, businessy exposure type stuff. I have sort of a few galleries that I would love to work with someday. And, you know, I kind of have those in my head as sort of like a reach kind of thing for at some point. But you know, kind of again, like with my story with the first gallery, it's not quite something you can kind of force yourself into and stuff. And so you know, I'm really kind of just being patient and, you know, with that kind of thing. But so let me see if there was anything else. And I think, you know, along with that gallery line, like I would love to so I had a solo show with a band gallery in 2022, but it was an online solo show. They were still kind of you know, in that phase from the pandemic and stuff. And so yes, I would love to, you know, have like an in-person solo show at some point where, you know, I could exhibit works that I've spent a lot of time on and, you know, be able to interact with people. And you know, it's such a different feeling. And, you know, so I kind of consider that one a sort of baby step in the right direction, but I would love to, you know, have something, you know, big and, you know, be able to like invite people, you know, maybe have my parents come out, that kind of thing. So
That's
uh,
very cool.
yeah, yeah.
Love that. Well, we'll hold that space for you. And
Yeah. Thank
For
you.
sure. Yeah.
imagine us being there as well. We would love
Yeah,
Oh,
we would love that.
I would
yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything from your community that reached out that we don't want to miss before we close? I really want to respect your time, particularly when you're not feeling 100%.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll check.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Um,
let's see. Oh, this was an interesting question. So there was kind of two that I enjoyed. So one was asking if I would ever consider putting myself into one of my paintings.
uh-huh.
Uh, and actually, I do have a sort of piece that is planned out that I have, you know, in Photoshop that I would love to do eventually. And I kind of already have a concept lined up, and I feel like that'd be really fun. It was interesting because I had the idea. I had sort of a landscape image that I wanted to work with, and so I spent like a whole afternoon photographing myself, which was very hard. You know, in a
Sure.
very specific lighting, and you know, so I was kind of running, you know, putting the timer on my camera, posing, coming back, checking it, just over and over again, and you know, and so that you know that made me respect a lot of people that, you know, do pose for paintings or photos, and because it's really challenging. And but yeah, so I have sort of a painting lined up that I would love to do at some point. You know, is maybe a, you know, a different version of like a self-portrait. But yeah, and then the other question was about how to kind of get clients for like specifically custom work. Um, and at least for me, you know, what's worked really well is my website. I've put a lot of time into making my website approachable, hopefully, and aesthetically pleasing and kind of interesting to peruse and stuff. And so, sort of for the last few years, every kind of commission I've gotten is, you know, someone that has been browsing my website and, you know, eventually reaches out to me via email. And you know, they can kind of see my library of, you know, work that I've done for gallery shows and other custom work. You know, I just have a full section of, you know, custom paintings that I've done on my website where people can see what I've done for clients and sort of the kind of the projects that I will take on versus projects that I won't. And so, you know, so I think that's really helped, and kind of like putting up, you know, semi-consistent blog posts, you know, on my website, I think has really helped. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, but honestly, like just putting yourself out there and saying, I am available for, you know, commissions can be really big because sometimes people don't know, and, you know, you can't always, you know, think that, you know, people know. And so can't make that assumption, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just have a tiny question. I know I need to wrap up, but when you get commission work, I'm just curious. Do they allow you freedom within that, or do they like, I want you to render this image or this idea, or do they like, do you interview them and they have all these thoughts? I mean, if I were imagining that I would someday be able to, you know, have one of your commission pieces, for me, I would be curious, like, okay, because I would like you to see inside what I'm seeing, and then I'm curious how that renders. Like, I wouldn't have that. I would like give you ultimate freedom to express that of which came up. So I'm curious if you get that, or if you get like, what's your commission work like?
That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like I would love to have a project like that someday with just kind of complete freedom. And I think it's
Yeah, that'd
evolved.
be me. We'll put that for the record. I would like to have that space.
Yeah, well, mark that down. Yeah, I think early on, I think it's actually evolved with the type of work that people see I'm doing on my own. So early on, I was doing a lot more abstract and kind of surreal stuff. And so I would get commission projects that sort of reflected that. And so people would go on my website and they would see sort of an abstract piece, and it'd be a specific color palette, and they'd reach out to me and say, I want a bigger version of this, in maybe this different color palette. And so that sort of had freedom in terms of, the abstraction and stuff, but it was kind of replicating something that I'd done before. But yeah, so I think for the most part, people recognize kind of my ability to render things realistically. And so, that's what they have been gravitating towards, which I enjoy. And so, I think typically overall, it's been they've either had an image reference, or some of the more involved projects where actually we were sort of creating an image together. There was one project that was actually a friend of mine that I play volleyball with. He wanted essentially a completely like new image that, he didn't have any sort of reference for. And so I was putting together images and ideas in Photoshop. And so it came out very organically from that. And so that was really cool. I hadn't really done anything like that before. But yeah, so typically, yeah, people are reaching out, looking for something, usually more realistically rendered. And I think that kind of adds to the meaning for them. My sort of next commission that I'll be doing relatively soon, a man wants sort of like a landscape, but he wants like a bicycle in the foreground. And it's like a very sort of significant bicycle because of the person who rides it. It's like a family member. And he specifically kind of reached out to me because of my level of realism and detail. And he wanted to include like the rust on the bike because it's so old, but he still uses it. And it's sort of like a part of his personality. And then capturing like the landscape of this very unique island, and that has kind of like unique aspects of it and stuff. And so I think that's why I've been so enjoying these recent commissions is people are sort of understanding like they want the skill that I can provide, but also along with the significant
I love
meaning.
the depth. Yeah, the depth of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's been really nice. But yeah.
Awesome. Anything else, Austin? Thank you for your time. I know we went a little long because it was hard not to sit by your fire. I just am enjoying it so much. Anything else that you would like as we close, like to share, or thoughts, closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts. I mean, I appreciate you all reaching out. Anytime people kind of reach out for like any sort of interview like this, I always really enjoy, because it's nice to just kind of get out sort of thoughts. And if they somehow help people, I know I've listened to sort of podcast episodes with artists, and I can just remember little things that I've picked out and just kind of stay in my memory. And so I know it can really help. And so yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like this sort of what you all are doing with your sort of community is super important. And, I'm like fully behind that, in whatever kind of medium it takes. And so, yeah, I mean, I would love for artists to remember like they are not alone. And, their work is valuable and people will see that. And, yeah, so, there's a community out there, and take advantage of it. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you, Austin.
Yeah,
I
thank you so much.
trust you'll get well and feel
Mhm.
100% soon. And thank you again for joining us. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. I'm
thank
happy to
you.
amplify your voice out there.
Oh yeah, appreciate
Yeah.
that.